Hi everybody, how's it going? As you can see, I'm in Paris today. Let's see if we can do something about the lighting. Oh, shoot. Oh, all right, we're okay. I'll see if I can get another light for Thursday's class, but hopefully you had a nice weekend, you're doing okay, and you're ready to get back to learning. Just a reminder, we do have our first exam, our midterm exam this coming weekend, and we will talk about that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and actually do that. Yeah, there you go. All right, you can look that over as I set this up here. There I am. Okay. So yes, you do have your midterm exam coming up, and you can take it in any 90-minute period starting midnight 12:01 in the morning on Friday, and you have till Sunday midnight. So you have 3 full days to take the exam at any time you feel ready to take it. Of course, once you start it, you do need to finish it within that 90-minute period, with the exception being for those of you that have accommodations. You will be given the appropriate amount of time that you've been allotted by that group. It is open book, meaning that you can use the actual book or your notes or copies of the slides or slides online, as well as the lecture recordings if you'd like. However, there is no way, as we've been saying, there's no way you're going to be able to pass the exam without having studied beforehand. So just because it's open book, I know for some of you, you've never had an open book exam before, and the tendency is to think you don't need to study, and that is absolutely not true. There is no way you'll be able to look up every answer or even a majority of the answers in that 90-minute period. The test is designed so you can't do that. We do want you to study. Okay, so please do study hard, and then you will have some time to look up, say, the 5-10 questions you're not sure of during that 90-minute period. But again, you don't want it to be many more than that to check your answers. All right. Even though it's open book, that doesn't mean you can take it with somebody else. It's very important you take it on your own, as I'm sure you understand. This is honor system. And that being said, we do have ways of seeing if people take it together in terms of patterning of answers. So, honor system, but we do want you to take it alone. It's important that you do. It covers everything through today's lecture and Thursday's lecture. I might have a chance on Thursday to start a new topic, which would be touch, in which case that would not be material on the midterm. That would be material for your final. But if that happens, if I do have time, I will absolutely let you know that on Thursday. I'll say, okay, that's it for the midterm exam. Now we're going to start covering new material, and it will be very clear. And it should be clear from the chapters you're reading and the topics that are discovered in discussion section that your midterm will just be covering hearing and smell and taste. There are 2 chapters on hearing and 2 chapters on smell and 1 chapter on taste. And that will be what is covered from the book as well as the lecture and the discussion section. Okay, so everything through taste for the exam this coming weekend. That is going to include discussion section material, not from tomorrow, but from last Wednesday, where you went through smell and taste. And so what's going to be presented tomorrow will be touch. You'll have 2 different sections kind of combined into 1 for touch tomorrow. That will not be on your midterm. That will be tested on the final. And you will be given a 10-15 minute period at the end of tomorrow's sections to ask questions. So that review, Tron will be there to answer questions. She's not going to go through entire lectures or tell you the highlights. The highlights. I mean, it's everything on your slides. Concentrate on that. Concentrate on the material that you were presented in section that was not covered in the book and not covered in the lecture. So it should be pretty straightforward in terms of what material you're going to be studying. But she will be there to answer questions. So please do come in with questions. Look through your notes, look through the slides, look through the book to see if there's anything you're confused about. and ask her tomorrow. She'll be happy to answer those questions. She'll be prepared for that. Okay, anything else I need to say on this? I think I've covered all these points. Yes, good. So, yep, I think I've covered everything, but let me take a couple of seconds here and see if you folks have any questions about the exam coming up this weekend. So how are we doing here in terms of how many folks are here right now? Let's see. All right, about 9 of you are here, good. Questions about the exam, questions that are either on the material or the nature of the questions. I mean, this is so straightforward. You've already gotten so many questions. We'll be doing more questions today. So you'll have those questions right away. There's no excuse not to do well. I should say this, because of the nature of the open book nature of the exam and the fact that I've been giving you questions that are actually on the exam, people on the exam do very well. People do very well in the summer because they have so many questions and things ready, and it's open book and all that sort of thing. So don't expect a curve. It is probably going to be the case that, you know, somewhere between 90 and 100 will be the 100% would be the kind of A range, and 80 into 90 would be B range, and kind of standard grading for this, because people do very, very well. So imagine yourself getting, you know, you want to get 90% of the questions correct. That's going to take some studying. Okay, if, you know, for whatever reason people have trouble, you know, a curve will be applied. That being said, people rarely have trouble with the nature, based on the nature of the exam and the fact that I'm giving you questions. But, you know, you got to study. Okay, I should say just very quickly, the other thing is, when you get your grade on, I guess, Monday, when I post the number grade, I'm also going to post a very rough letter translation of those grades. Likely it will be like everything between 90 and 100s, you know, percent of on the exam is going to be in the A range. 80 to 90 will be in the B range, but that might shift a little bit. But do know this, we do not assign letter grades to the midterm exam. We just have the score, and then when we see your score in the final, we add them up, and then we apply letter grades. And so, you know, don't think, well, you know, I didn't get an A on the first exam, so there's no way I'll get an A in the class or something like that. It doesn't really work like that. We're not assigning letter grades until the very end. Okay. All right, questions on that, assigning grades or the nature of the exam or the curve or anything like that? All right. Nothing? Okay. Just looking to see if there's any hands up. No. Or chat. No. Yeah, looks like a video of Notre Dame before the fires, I think. But I think they made a lot of progress repairing it. So if you've ever have a chance to go there, it's beautiful, and hopefully it'll be open by the time you're there. All right. Let's go ahead and continue our lecture on smell then, if there's no questions. Cool. Great. Okay, so let's refresh what we've been discussing about with regard to smell. Yeah, how are we doing here? Yeah, okay, we're good. All right, so to remember about smell, we actually spent some time in the last class going through the research that I discussed in chapter, I guess it is 3 on smell, that discusses that there are really surprising things that we can recognize through smell, you know, giving people t-shirts and asking them to recognize if it's a sibling or a romantic partner or something like that. And it was interesting that all these things seem to be available to us. And we talked about the possible genetic basis of that, you know, relating to this major histocompatibility complex, how that might relate to our immune systems and autoimmune systems, as well as our scent signature, and the ramifications of that for what type of smells we are sensitive in to with other people. Okay, And then we shifted gears just a little bit, and we decided to talk about the type of odor analysis our brain does when we're not conscious of it. Remember, much of what we're going to be talking about in this class is perceptual skills that we really typically don't have conscious access to. And that's really what we're moving into here with this kind of second part of smell, which is covered in chapter 4 in the book, which is subliminal odors. And just to remind you here, all that subliminal really means here, all that term is applying to, is the fact that there is a lot of analysis your brain is conducting on odor that we don't typically have conscious awareness of. It's subliminal, just means below the level of our conscious awareness. That's all it means in this case. And that's very surprising to a lot of people, because, we walk into a room and we have a sense that there's a smell there, maybe, when we notice cooking or some sort of perfume or something like that, but we adapt to it very quickly and think that's the end of our smell perception. However, as we've been discussing, your brain continues to analyze smell even after you lose conscious awareness of it. And that analysis can be proven in some kind of interesting kind of behavioral changes. Now, this is where things get a little dicey, and we're going to have to talk about this fact throughout our discussion today. That these kind of behavioral changes, these very subtle changes that can be induced by smell, are not coercive in the sense that you really can't change major behavioral patterns with unconscious smell, right? So when we introduce this idea that there are environmental odors that can be designed for public spaces, such as the work of Mark Peltier and Eileen Kenny, designers of smells for hotel lobbies and casinos and department stores, right? You can see that the brain does analysis on these smells without our conscious awareness in subtle behavioral changes, but the behavioral changes are very, very subtle. So the concerns that the public had of the Mirage Hotel, including a subliminal smell that caused people to gamble or caused them to gamble longer, is probably not well grounded, okay? What those unconscious smells do is they make it a more pleasant place, a more maybe enticing place to be, right? But that doesn't cause gambling. That doesn't cause maybe, the concerns over self-destructive behavior or something like that. It just adds to the decor. And that's what is important to remember here. If you've been to the Mirage, there's a lot of cool things to look at when you go in there. They want you to stay for a while. So they want you to look at the little zoo in back and the dolphins, and I don't remember what else is. Oh yeah, the giant fish tank behind the front desk, and the, kind of Mirage sort of theme with the palm trees and stuff, and the lights and the sounds of the slot machines and all that stuff. It's made to be exciting. It's made for you to enjoy your time there. All those things you see and hear are made to want you to stay there longer. Okay? And that's what the odor does as well. Okay? Now, it seems a little different because after a while we don't notice the odor, and we continue to see the fish tank, and we continue to see the zoo and back and all that. But that unconscious influence doesn't do much more than add to the decor. Right? But there's ways we can measure that unconscious influence, and that's how we got into some of these experiments having to do first with cleanliness, right? Actually also the fact that you can associate odors, unconscious, subliminal odors with rooms, right? We talked about that experiment but we left off talking about these experiments where a very, very low level of a cleaning smell was presented at a level below consciousness, okay? And what it ended up doing is inducing people to read words on a computer screen faster if, in fact, the words were related to cleaning, to then discuss that later on in the day they'll have plans that are related to cleaning, and then, kind of cool, even maybe clean up crumbs a tiny bit more than one might if they weren't being presented this subliminal odor of a cleaning fluid. Importantly, and this is something I'm going to emphasize throughout our discussion, these are subliminal effects in that subjects are not consciously aware that this smell is there. They don't have an awareness like, smells like pine sol. That doesn't happen. It's much more low level than that. Okay. In fact, in all these experiments I'm going to be talking about today, at the end of the experiment, subjects are typically asked, did you smell anything in the room? And subjects almost always say no. And they'll even be kind of coaxed a little bit more. Are you sure you didn't smell anything in the room? Because sometimes subjects say there's a cleaning smell in the room. You know, they kind of see if there's any sense that they have a conscious awareness of it. And subjects will say, no, I mean, maybe there was a cleaning smell, but I didn't notice it, right? And that's a way to ensure that subjects were changing their behaviors based on the subliminal nature of the odor, okay? In fact, if this is done with a strong pine sol smell there, right? If people say, oh God, what's in this room? It smells like cleaning fluid. Their behavior will not be changed. It seems that it kind of has to work at a subliminal level, right? So let's step back here again. Let's be careful. That sounds a little scary, right? So subliminal smells can affect us that conscious smells that we have an awareness of, can't affect it. That sounds scary, but let's remember, big picture here, these behavioral changes are tiny things, right? They don't last long. In fact, I think they've followed up some of these cleaning smell experiments where if you then leave the room and go to a different room and sit there for a while, right, and then are asked your plans, they won't have to do a cleaning. So they are not long-lasting effects by any means. And there's subtle changes, and sometimes they don't work for everybody, right? But, you know, there are effects that the point of these demonstrations is to show that the brain responds to subliminal smells in such a way that it can change subtle aspects of behavior. But subtle is the operative word here. Okay, cool. Let's look at more of these. And I think these get more interesting as we go on. I mean, I just thought this stuff was so cool when I was learning about it. Yeah. Sorry about this. Sorry, I guess I have to touch it. Yeah, there we go. You can smell fear. Now, this stuff is, I think, really cool. Let's talk a little bit about the experiments. I'll give you a little background first. You might know this about certain insects and certain mammals, in fact, that if an insect, for example, is threatened and put in a fear state, that they release a certain chemical that then warns other insects, cockroaches, for example, that there's something scary here, right? They're very adaptive for the species, for the I don't know, clan of cockroaches that live in your kitchen. If a cockroach, we don't have them in our kitchen, but I've been in other places where there have been cockroaches. Hawaii, for example, there's giant cockroaches, right? They've been grabbing your snack food or something like that. If you scare one and it gets scared and then runs under the baseboards, where it's been scared, it has released a chemical keeping other cockroaches away. So another cockroach has come out and looking for food. They'll smell the release of the chemical and go, whoa, boy, I better go back under the baseboards. They smell fear. Same thing with deer and other mammals as well, same sort of thing. The question is, does that happen with us? And as you can see by the name of that slide, the answer is yes, to a very subtle degree. Okay, so let's first find a scared smell. And very often, these are taken from men who are either on a roller coaster, a scary roller coaster. We went at Six Flags. My son just got back from Disney yesterday, And I asked him, were there any scary roller coasters? He said, nah, there's nothing scary at Disneyland. It's not like that. And he's absolutely right. But, some of these Six Flags roller coasters are, gosh, I'd never go on those. They look too scary. And so they'll have the person, on the roller coaster, and then as soon as they're done, they'll grab a Q-tip or a cotton pad or something and take a swab, typically under the arms, but you can do it other places as well. And what they're getting here is not body odor smell. Remember, this is the natural kind of chemical release, and that will be the sample that they'll then use to see if they can then transmit that fear to other subjects. The other times it's done is during an exam. They've taken swabs from people taking the MCATs. That's the pre-med exam, right? Where the pressure on that is really, really intense. And then use that as the scared smell, right? All right, so there you have your scared smell. Now this is important. This is a smell that is not very detectable at all. In fact, what they do is when they then take the scared smell and present it to a new group of subjects, right? They make sure that any sort of human body smell is hidden. Maybe they put an alcohol smell on top of it or something like that. And then they present this through a mask or something. Sometimes it comes through the ventilation system in the room, but nobody is ever going to, or rarely is ever going to say that they're conscious of smelling another human. Okay, rarely happens in these experiments. In fact, they do this questionnaire at the end, and if somebody says, yeah, I smelled a sweat or something like that, they don't use their data. This is only used, they only analyze the data of people who have no conscious awareness of the smell. But if it is presented to a new group of subjects, some interesting, subtle, but interesting things happen. First of all, what they can do. So these are undetectable odor samples from sweat of stressed men, and either from a roller coaster or an exam or something. The first thing they'll do is they'll show them, this isn't a great example of this actually. I tried to get one, yeah. But it's showing the subtlety of it. Okay. Imagine this. Don't worry, this is not actually, I don't think this was taken from the paper. I don't know where that's from, but I think maybe it's just better if we imagine. You got a picture of a single person first smiling, okay? And then there's a picture of that same person frowning. I don't think it's frowning actually. I think it might be scared, something like that. So smiling, scared. Let's do it that way, okay? And then what you do is you kind of set up your Photoshop or some sort of fancy pants graphics so you can actually interpolate, so you have images of the face that are somewhere between smiling and scared, okay? Somewhere between smiling and scared. And so now you can say create 9 images. The end point, the end image of this side is the regular old smiling face. The end point of on this side is the regular old scared face. But you've got these kind of ambiguous images in the middle, these 7 images in the middle, okay, that are somewhat, ambiguous between smiling and scared. And the question is, will an undetectable odor of a person who has been scared have an influence on how you interpret these ambiguous facial expressions? And the answer is, yeah, it will. Okay? So you're more likely to say those more ambiguous facial expressions are of fear versus happiness if there's an undetectable odor being presented in the room. Again, coming through the ventilation system. Sometimes, as I said, people wear masks where the odor is presented that way. Importantly, it is never something that people are conscious of. If people happen to smell a body scent, their data isn't used, but for the vast majority, 99 out of 100 subjects, they never notice any sort of body-related smell. Maybe they smell rubbing alcohol or something like that, but nothing related to a body. If they're in the group that's being presented the smell sample from a person who's just been on a roller coaster or just took an exam or something like that, they will themselves interpret those ambiguous images as being more negative than somebody who's not presented that smell. So I'm in the control group now, and I might say, I'm not being presented this negative smell, this fearful smell, and I might say more of these faces are happy. More of these ambiguous faces are happy, right? And if I'm in the experimental group, the group that's actually getting the fearful smell that I'm unaware of, I would say more of these faces are expressing fear. And they're shown randomly, so it's not shown in a line like that typically. And so it's kind of a little bit more objective than that, right? So they are interpreted as being more negative. Cool. That's the first demonstration of this. Another demonstration of this I think that you'll enjoy is this. What is that? That's a hand clap, right? But what I tried to do just now was induce something called the startle reflex. And the startle reflex is just what happens when you're startled. I think if I have a loud sound somewhere in this room, because I have, I do. I have something over there, but it's not worth reaching. I've got a kind of percussion instrument that really is startling. But you get the idea. It's like something very loud. And if somebody does that next to your, head, you're not expecting it. You know what you do? You blink, right? That's what this is showing right here. Okay. And that is called the startle reflex. Typically, there's lots of ways of measuring the startle reflex, but eye blink is a very simple way. And the thing is, you can use a little camera to measure the eye blink reflex as somebody hears a loud sound. Okay. And what it allows you to do is determine how quickly a person blinks, how kind of, how strong that blink is. Is it like a really kind of pronounced blink, or is it a more kind of relaxed blink? Okay. So you have now a way of measuring through eye blink how startled somebody was, kind of. You get the idea. It's a very simple way of measuring it, right? So now the question is, you have a way of inducing the startle reflex. That's what's creating the startle reflex right there. But can you increase the kind of amplitude of the startle reflex, how fast somebody blinks, how hard they blink, by presenting them this undetectable odor of another fearful person? Okay, so you're taking your odor from the roller coaster rider, you're presenting it to the person in undetectable amounts, right? It's subliminal. And will that influence the startle reflex? And the answer, of course, is yes. It amplifies. If you are being presented the fearful odor subliminally from another person, you'll blink harder, you'll blink faster. There's an amplification of the startle reflex. An amplification of the startle reflex. Now, again, the smell doesn't induce the reflex. That's really kind of created by the sound, but the smell can modulate. It can amplify it and make it larger than it would be than if you were in the same experiment and weren't being presented the fearful smell. Okay. One other thing that you can do with this fearful smell, which I think is kind of interesting, and it's kind of much more practical. That doesn't have to do with interpreting facial expressions or how much you're startled or something like that. It has to do with, in a sense, how careful or vigilant you are on a task. All right. So here we go. Imagine, I'm just going to put this out here. Say you have a word task where you're asked to say whether the words are related or unrelated. Okay, so hat, cap, obviously related, leg, cup, unrelated. Very simple task. And it's related, unrelated, related, unrelated, all these kind of presented randomly. Very simple. People, usually get close to 100% correct on this. But they're also asked to respond as quickly as possible. So now the real measure becomes reaction time. How fast are people responding to these pairs? Related, 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 unrelated, related, unrelated, that sort of thing. And if you are being presented a subliminal odor from a fearful person as you perform the task, you actually respond a little bit faster, which is interesting. Okay, not all of the exposure to a fearful smell is necessarily going to have more kind of negative ramifications for how you respond. Here's a case where maybe you can get through it, I don't know, exam a little faster if the people around you are a little fearful. So, you know, I mean, these are very, very subtle effects. So I wouldn't sit next to the most anxious person on the exam necessarily. There's lots of other reasons you might not want to do that when you have exams in class, right? Maybe they'd be very fidgety. But it's just interesting. It shows that the brain is analyzing a subliminal odor to the extent that it actually has subtle but measurable effects on how your behavior, how it's manifest in your behavior. Okay. Again, I need to be very clear here that these are very subtle effects. I mean, it's not like you're gonna, let's go back to the facial expressions. It's not like you're gonna see a smiling face and say, oh, that looks like a fearful face. It's the ambiguous faces that are affected, right? The smell, a subliminal smell of a fearful person is not going to create the startle reflex. Okay, that has to be done. Instead, it's going to amplify it just a little bit. So maybe you'll blink just a tiny bit harder than you normally would. And it's not going to really help your accuracy on saying hat and cap are the same idea and leg and cup are not, right? You know, in terms of the performance on that simple task, you'll do equally well regardless of whether or not you're exposed to the smell. It just speeds your responses a tiny bit. Very subtle, but measurable effects. Really, the purpose here, the point here is to show that the brain is always analyzing smells, even if we're unaware of them, and it seems to know and recognize something about smells that are conveying somebody else's fear, which is really interesting. Last word on this before we leave these. Actually, two things now that I look at it, is that this effect is actually, these effects I just talked about are actually larger for individuals who would be described as anxious. So, you know, there's lots of kind of questionnaire methods to determine anxiety in a person, base level anxiety. You know, like I'm an anxious person, I'll tell you right now. And so for someone like me, I would probably show greater effects of subliminal fearful odor on these tests than somebody who is less anxious than me, right? So that's not surprising in some ways, but it's interesting that fear seems to be maybe affecting anxious people a tiny bit more. Again, they're small effects, but for anxious people, they're a tiny, tiny bit bigger. And then finally, disgust. Oh, I did not include that. It's not on the slide, it won't be on your test, but if you're interested in this, let me go back. These sort of effects also work for not just people who are put in a fearful state, but for people who are put in a disgusted state. Okay, so you can have a person watch maybe a kind of yucky movie, maybe looking at gross food or something like that, people eating gross food. God, there used to be this show on it. It's long before you guys were born, but I can't remember what it was called. But it was a show where it was people were kind of challenged to eat kind of raw, like gross things like raw intestines or something like that of cows. And they'd have close-ups of these people, and it would really, I mean, when you watch them do this, they'd look disgusted, and you would get disgusted. If you were in fact, watching this, you would probably secrete a tiny bit of an odor that could then be used to induce something like a very, very small change in somebody else's disgust sort of reactions, which is interesting. But anyway, let's continue on this. Let's go ahead with the what I mentioned before in this fear, the conveyance of fear through odor. As I said, this is something that is well known in the animal world. And in fact, people who work on extermination and work on chemicals for insect extermination have to be very aware of this. They want to kind of suppress this, using chemicals. They want to suppress a cockroach's ability to tell another cockroach that it's dangerous here. Like they want to suppress that, so they have a better chance of killing the the clan of cockroaches or whatever. So they know a lot about this. And it's not just true of cockroaches, it's true of ants, mice, deer, okay, amoeba. But it's interesting, in all of those cases, when animals do detect a fearful smell, it seems almost reflexive how they respond versus how we respond. This is going to be important later on as we start trying to understand how much we know about animals' communication through smell can be applied to humans. Let's go with our cockroaches, same is true of ants. When they detect a fearful smell from another cockroach or ant, it seems reflexive. They will go like that. You apply a fearful smell in an area of a laboratory where a cockroach is moving. As soon as it gets to that fearful smell, it seems like it's a reflex. And that's also true of mice and deer too, and amoeba, I guess. Their reactions to this fearful smell of another animal of the species, right? Another, their deer friends, their mice friends. It seems reflexive. It seems like there's nothing they can do with it. Their body just goes, and they just run away as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's important. The reactions seem to be different when it comes to how animals respond to a fearful smell versus how people respond to a fearful smell. It doesn't seem that anything is reflexive in our behavior when we're exposed to a fearful smell. Right? You say, well, but wait a second, Rosenblum, I see that word reflex up there, so is that true? And again, let's be very clear on this. Clapping, but that creates the startle reflex. What changes the startle reflex a little bit is the smell. It amplifies it a tiny, tiny bit, but it doesn't induce, it doesn't create the startle reflex. The sound does, okay? The sound does. So there's nothing reflexive. I mean, there's not like, we're in an experiment and all of a sudden we're presented with the subliminal odor of somebody who's been on a roller coaster and we want to get out of the room, and we jump out of our chairs and run out of the room. We don't do that, okay? Animals do in a sense, but we don't do that. None of this seems like reflexive sort of responding to a fearful smell, where animals do seem to have a reflective response to fearful smell. Okay, let's keep that in mind as we go through the rest of our discussion about these subliminal odors and move to the next topic. And that has to do with fertility. And I lucked out. I got to interview one of the most well-known individuals who studied this topic of how humans seem to detect the odor of fertility in a very surprising way. Martha McClintock, there she is. She's a bit of a controversial figure because people don't all buy this yet necessarily. But I can't remember the years of this. I think it was the 70s, maybe? I don't know, it says in the book, certainly. She was at Wellesley College, and it's an all-women's school. I actually taught there for 1 year before I came out to Riverside. It's one of the most beautiful campuses in the world. Oh, somebody's chatting, hooray. Jacqueline asks, this is so interesting about the fearful smells. I wonder if this happens in places like Universal Studios, Horror Nights, escape rooms, or movie theaters. I bet you it does happen in all those places. My kids have been to all of those things, of course. I don't know how they go to those horror nights. I mean, I get the idea of watching a scary movie and being a tiny bit scared, and it's a bit of a thrill. But somebody in full zombie makeup running towards me, or surprising me from behind a barrier or something like that. That does not sound fun for me at all. Maybe I'm just too old, but I can't remember a time in my life where that would have seemed fun. I hated that sort of thing, being kind of startled, especially being startled by, a very, professional looking zombie. And my kids say it's like, it's like being in The Walking Dead. It's really, really scary. So I bet they are secreting. Yeah, that's actually really good if you want to do research on smell, Jacqueline. That's a really good place to get some samples. I think you're absolutely right. That's a good point. Okay. All right. Thank you. Anyway, back to Martha McClintock. So she was at Wellesley College. She did her undergraduate degree there, and she was in she was taking a biology course. She was a biology major, and they were speaking about I guess how animals are known to synchronize their menstrual cycles. Right? I'll get this on there. Yeah. Menstrual entrainment. So this is something that was known about rodents, right? Rodents that are, come from, different parts of an area. When put together, in a laboratory, their menstrual cycles, the little mice menstrual cycles, will entrain. They'll all end up having their periods and ovulation and all that at the same time during the month. And it was known of mice at the time. It was known of other rats, certainly, mostly from people's lab experience. They look what happens, you do this, and then they were also able to determine that this was occurring. This was occurring because of odors that the mice and rats were secreting. That were then being received by the other female mice and rats, and that was kind of creating this entrainment. So they did experiments on why this was happening with mice, and found that the air needed to be provided between them. Right, if they were sealed off and there was no air pass between the mice, they would not entrain. And then did other sorts of experiments to determine that it was coming through these kind of chemical messengers were coming through the mice smell system, and that was then affecting their bodies, so they would entrain. Right? And there's possibly a adaptive purpose for that, for all the mice in a small area to have their menstrual cycles in terms of when they're fertile and when they give birth and when they're nursing together and all that sort of thing. But that's another story, really. But it happens. It absolutely happens with mice. And Martha was, as a young student, was listening to a lecture on this, and she raised her hand. She said, this happens with people too. And this was a really kind of very startling thing for her to say, because there was no conception of this at all. And they said, "What do you mean this happens with people?" She said, "Well, Martha, when she was a freshman, was a work-study student, and one of her jobs as a work-study student was to go to the drugstore for her dorm when they needed to, when the women needed her to go." And what she said was, it was very clear her freshman year that as the year went on, she would have to then, it was initially spread out when they asked her to go, but after a while, all the women were asking her to go get, feminine hygiene supplies at the same time of the month. She said it was, we used to joke about it, that everybody's kind of linked now, now we're real dorm because we're all cycling at the same time. And people said, well, that might happen, or it might seem like it happens, but it has nothing to do with why mice and rats are doing it. There's just no way. She said, well, let's go ahead and test this sort of thing. Let's get a little bit more formal about it. So this was her senior thesis, and she went back to the dorm. And I guess what she did is she had people, freshmen, it was with freshmen. She wrote, after people were admitted, she wrote letters to all the incoming freshmen and said, "I know this is going to sound silly, a little strange, but could you let me know when, your menstrual cycle is? Could you let me know when your period is? Could you just, give me a sense of the range of days each month?" And everyone wrote back, or at least some of them wrote back, and say, "Okay, here you go." And I won't say this, but never mind. Well, okay, I'll tell you. One of the subjects in the experiment was Hillary Rodham Clinton. She was part of this, as it turns out. Martha didn't really give that up, but I guess I had heard something about that, or maybe Hillary Rodham Clinton said something about it at one point. That's Bill Clinton's wife, President Clinton's wife, right? Oh, you know this, right? She ran for president against Trump. She was there, and she was one of the subjects in the experiment. It's a long story, but anyway. So the women then come to the dormitory, and she has the original baseline information about their synchronized periods, and then she wanted to know what would happen after a few months. Would the women start synchronizing their periods by cohabitation. And that's absolutely what she found. So after 4 months living in the dorms, the women would pretty much be synchronized in terms of their period. Now, the way this had been discussed with mice and rats was through a concept called pheromones. And that's just it's a new word, maybe to some of you. But really, we've been discussing it already with regard to mice and rats. These are the chemical messengers sent through the smell system of rodents that kind of allows this menstrual synchrony to occur. There's other things pheromones are thought to do in animals, but in this context, that was thought to be the reason for mice and rats. Is in fact, yeah, there's this chemical messenger, and they absolutely established that that's what it was, and they named these chemical messengers pheromones. Okay, so an animal secretes a certain odor during different parts of the month. That odor then gets to another animal, gets to another rat, okay? And that rat smells that odor, and somehow that changes the metabolism of the rat that's receiving the odor so that it shifts the menstrual cycle to match the donor's menstrual cycle, okay? So Martha said in her senior thesis, maybe the same thing happens through chemical secretions for humans as well, right? And published that in Nature. Imagine your senior project is published in one of the most important science journals in the world. That's just an amazing story. But there was so much criticism. They thought, no, humans aren't subject to these same sort of influences. There's got to be other reasons why the self-report information happened. And I understand the criticism. I mean, before you say that humans are guided by these same kind of hidden smells as rats and mice, you got to be pretty sure that's what's going on. Because when, people are giving, self-reports on when their menstrual cycles are, there could be other things that are involved. So, maybe once they started living with other people, they were a little less accurate about when their menstrual cycles occurred. And they were influenced by, what other people were saying about their menstrual cycles, right? So self-reports are not perfect, right? They're just answering questionnaires. And, depending on how distracted you are at the time, you might not be perfect. Okay. So that's part of it. People criticize that you can't make any conclusions about this menstrual entrainment based on self-reports. And then there was this other thing too, which I still think is interesting. I'm not sure, I can't remember how she explains this. But you would think that if the smell was most important, the individual you would be most synchronous with would be your roommate. Now, you might know I can't remember, you guys, no, I guess probably not COVID session folks like you were not required to live on campus during your freshman year, but a lot of schools do have that requirement. And very often, I know my younger son's about to leave for college in a couple of weeks, and he's been assigned roommates. He doesn't know anything about them. He's been chatting a little bit with them on social media. But often it is the case that your roommate isn't your best friend when you're a freshman, right? You might have a perfectly pleasant time with them and get along fine and everything works out as a roommate, but that might not end up being the person you spend the most daylight time with, right? You might have made a closer friend who you have more in common with down the hall because they're also in one of your classes or something like that. So it's not necessarily the case that your roommate is your best friend. You spend more time with other people, at least daylight time. However, right, they're the ones that you're sleeping with at night. They're the ones that you're in the room with 8 hours a day, 7-8 hours a day with the door shut. That's the pheromone that you would be most exposed to. However, what she found is that people would entrain more to their friends down the hall than their roommates very often. Okay, the closer the friendship, that seemed to be predictive of the greater the entrainment. I'm uncertain how she ended up rationalizing this, but it was one of the criticisms of this kind of pheromone sort of interpretation of menstrual entrainment. Okay, So after she publishes this, gets all the criticism as a 21-year-old, she decides to go on and get a degree in biology. I can't remember where she went, it's in the book. But then she goes out and sets up a lab to really study this phenomenon because it's absolutely fascinating, right? And this is what she does. She sets up a lab that actually kind of looks more carefully at the possible chemical influence, the odor chemical influence on entrainment. So she collects sweat from women who are in either in their ovulation or pre-ovulation phase of their cycle. And I believe the sweat samples might have been taken from they were taken from some of the glands of regular sweat. It's not going to stink. It's not body odor sweat, right? It just smells like a person, right? But what she does is she disguises the smell that's there and then presents either the sweat from an ovulating woman or a pre-ovulating woman to other women, okay, who don't really know they're getting any sort of odor, right? So she applies it to the upper lips of women, but it's not, I can't remember exactly what the cover story was. We're going to clean your upper lip with some rubbing alcohol or something like that. And I can't remember what the story was, but they did not know they were getting an odor from another woman. That was very clear. So this odor is applied to the upper lips of the receiver women who do not know they're getting an odor from another woman. They can't smell another odor from another woman. They have no idea. Okay. But will it affect the receiver woman, okay, the one that gets the odor, so her cycle is shifted? And it's a beautiful set of data. She's able to shift the menstrual cycle in one direction, so the period comes earlier, or in the other direction, it comes later, depending on whether they get the ovulation sample or the pre-ovulation sample. It's not important you know the direction and ovulation versus pre-ovulation and all that sort of thing. I just want to show that I think this is a pretty compelling set of results saying that, yes, it is something to do with this chemical messenger, right, that can influence the ovulation cycle. Okay. In this case, you can do it pretty precisely, 2 to 3 days faster, speeding up the cycle, or 2 to 3 days slower, depending on what women receive. That's really the big story here. Here comes the gardener. Okay, so she publishes this, and I think people are now a little bit more convinced that something's going on, right? That you can actually shift the menstrual cycle by providing, a chemical, at least on a person's lip. Whether it's going through this smell system or not. There's other ways of finding that out potentially, but there's a chemical messenger that seems to be shifting menstrual cycles. Pretty darn cool. And here's where people said, okay, maybe there's a little bit of this going on, but that doesn't mean that all the sort of pheromone influences we see with rodents and deer and things like that we know can occur are really working with people. Because there's other types of pheromone influences we're going to see with animals. So let's go back to animals. So this was the real controversial topic, and this is still a little controversial, I think. I haven't talked to Martha in 10 years, but I imagine she would say the same thing. It's still a controversial issue. People don't buy this necessarily because these pheromone influences don't seem to be the same for people that they seem to occur for animals. By the way, if you're wondering what this is right here, this I got off a picture I got off the internet. You can buy synthetic pheromones on the internet, maybe even in some drugstores or something like that, that say that they can attract a mate or something like that. Okay, I will not. We'll get to the reason why this most certainly does not work. But I just wanted to kind of start discussing it at this point. But we're still seeing if, in general, real pheromones or real chemical messengers, seem to have effects on humans. All right. She'll say that, the reason why people are reluctant to say that pheromones play a role in humans is because the reactions we see in animals seem so different to pheromones than they do in humans. And she makes an interesting point here, but I'm going to build this point up slowly by introducing the different types of pheromones that are first discussed with animals. One type of pheromone is called a primer pheromone. And what a primer pheromone does in an animal is exactly what we've been talking about. It kind of primes the body to maybe change something about its metabolism. Okay, it's kind of chemical cycles. So an example, the perfect example of a primer pheromone with animals is menstrual entrainment. Okay, mice menstrual entrainment, for example. So there's an influence, there's a chemical messenger that is then received by the smell system of the animal, okay, and that changes their body in ways that cause entrainment of menstrual cycles between mice. Cool, that's one type of pheromone. Another type of pheromone influence you see from presumably another class of chemical messengers are called releaser or reflexive pheromones. And what these chemicals do is, rather than kind of having slow changes on the metabolism of an animal, is instead cause reflexive changes in an animal. And we've talked about one of these, right? We talked about ants and cockroaches, right? Kind of reflexively running when they are exposed to a chemical signal from another ant or cockroach that is fearful, right? It's almost as if it's like a reflex, like, the reflex that happens when the doctor hits your knee. It's like, can't help it. So I'm an ant, I'm walking around, and all of a sudden I go to a spot in the kitchen where another ant's been scared, and I will stop, smell it, and run, almost like, I can't help it, I gotta get out of here. It's like a reflex. Another one that's discussed are certain kind of mating behaviors. So supposedly, if a female pig who's an estrus is ready for mating, smells the smell of a male pig nearby, they will go into a mating stance. They'll get into a stance kind of ready to procreate with the male. And that is also considered reflexive. So, when the female goes into that stance, it's like they can't help it. And it's a chemical messenger sent out by the male that creates that reflexive stance that the female goes into. Okay? So these are the pheromones that are most often talked about with animals. These primer pheromones and releaser pheromones. And as you can see, those are very kind of, especially the releaser pheromones. That is not something, as we discussed on the previous slide, that is not something you typically see with humans. Even if there are subtle effects on a fearful smell when it comes to people, I don't run for my life when I smell somebody else being scared. Okay, that just doesn't happen. So let's see how these apply to humans, right? So this is Martha's argument now, saying, okay, so we can see if human influences of kind of chemical signals that go through the smell system have the same sort of effects. And she'll say, no, you don't see very much of that. So yes, you do see menstrual entrainment, she argues, and not everybody agrees with her. Again, it's a little bit controversial, less so than it was, but it is a little controversial still. And there's also some evidence that women, when they start cohabitating with a man, will have a more regular menstrual cycle. So if there's a little bit kind of a variability in a woman's menstrual cycle, so maybe it starts a few days earlier or a few days later from month to month, typically when she moves in with a man, and I don't even know if it has to be a romantic partner, they just have to be in close proximity, the menstrual cycle will become more regular. It will typically happen with less variability from month to month. You do see that, okay? Is that based on a pheromone? Well, that's a hard thing to determine for sure, but certainly it seems like it's something's going on with this kind of regularity in the menstrual entrainment, and it might have to do with smell, this kind of unconscious odor that's affecting the woman. But what about these releaser pheromones? And I have already talked about that. With humans, it does not really seem that a releaser pheromone influence is occurring, right? So unlike, a female pig, if a woman smells the presence of a man, that's nothing like that happens, and it's chances are she's not going to even talk to him necessarily, or anything like that. There is no sort of reflexive behavior, and the same thing with fear, right? There's not like a fearful response that's dramatic enough to be called a reflex when it comes to human beings. There have been discussions about infants, but it's not always easy to tell what's a reflex with infants, I think. So, in fact, if you put a little swab of the mom's smell in a crib of a newborn infant, what you see is the infant will start kind of, to the degree that the poor little infant can, will start moving towards that smell. Okay. And the fact that you see an infant, kind of an infant with a more simple nervous system, whatever, do that has led some folks to say, yeah, maybe we should consider that a reflexive behavior that is based on smell. Maybe that's considered a releaser pheromone. It's really hard to tell with infants, whether that's truly a reflex or not. Okay. And for that reason, Martha thinks that when you're talking about animals, you can talk about most of the pheromone influence being releaser and primer pheromones. But when you're talking about humans, you need to kind of talk about other types of pheromones too, because human behavior is so complex. And, so many things go into mating and fear and how we respond to those things in those contexts, that you really do need to talk about another type of pheromone, or maybe another set of pheromones. So she argues that we can, think about human pheromones as being related to animal pheromones, kind of the same type of, chemical messenger, but the reactions to those pheromones are going to be more complex. And so releaser and primer, just categorizing that every pheromone, every sort of chemical messenger that works through the smell system can be reduced to releaser and primer pheromones, is just too restrictive. And we'll talk about what type of pheromone she wants to include in discussions of human behavior in just a second. But now let's take a second and do one of our polling questions. Cool. All righty. Polling question having to do with smell. This one has to do with what a newborn infant can smell, and it's something we talked about last class. So the question is, excuse me, which is true about newborn infants' abilities to smell? A, they can recognize their mother's scent. B, they can recognize the scent of their amniotic fluid. C, both A and B. Or D, none of the above. Okay, I'll give you a minute to answer this, and then we'll talk about it. Might want to look back on the slide if you got it handy, because the answer is right there. think you're pretty much done. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. Okay, good. No, not perfect, but good. The correct answer is in fact C. They can detect, they can recognize both their mother scent and their amniotic fluid, as can the mother. Okay, so if you look back at the notes, you can see that they can recognize both of those things. So the correct answer is C. They can recognize their mother's scent, and they can also recognize the scent of their own amniotic fluid, which they have been swimming in for 9 months. And there's also an idea that maybe one of the reasons they're able to recognize their mother so easily is that their mother has a contribution to the amniotic fluid, and that is going to allow them to recognize not just what they've been swimming in, but also their mother and her natural scent signature. So the correct answer there is in fact C. Go ahead and take a picture of it. That will be a question on your exam. Cool. Great. All right. Any questions before we continue? All right, let's go back to our discussion of pheromones in humans. Make me big. Ooh, big and scary, in fact. All right. So what we're after here is expanding the notion of pheromones to include some of the complexities we might see with influences of odor on humans. And what Martha suggests is that we should consider two other classes when it comes to humans. We should consider one, a signaler pheromone. Sorry, let me get those over here. A signaler pheromone. And what does a signaler pheromone do according to her? Well, we've talked about these things. It's going to convey information about kin, whether we're related to person, gender, whether it's a male or female, and reproductive potential, which we will be talking about in just a second. Okay, we've already mentioned it a tiny bit, but she says that there are pheromones that occur with humans that are not kind of inducing any sort of reflexive behavior, but are still conveying a lot of information about somebody else. And we might want to consider those as pheromones as well. Okay, so that's a good name for it, the signal information. It is a pheromone that's signaling information about another person. And we saw that sort of influence when it came to all those t-shirt tests we were talking about, right? Those tests where people were able to recognize things like their relatives and the gender and the reproductive potential. And so maybe those should be considered pheromones. Those chemical signals should be considered pheromones, in addition to what is considered a pheromone in animals, like a releaser or primer. Okay? So humans are more complex. We need to think about more complex pheromones. The other type she likes to talk about is a modulator pheromone. And what a modulator pheromone would do is modulate certain types of more, present, faster behaviors, such as mood and emotion, okay? Where, it might not, change a person's mood dramatically, but might have a very subtle but measurable influence on a person's mood, a person's emotion. And in fact, we've talked about this too, right? We talked about the fear-inducing odors. Now, again, these are very small modulations, right? These are very, very small modulations in the mood of fear, right? That creates the reflex. What can increase the reaction to the reflex a tiny bit is being presented a chemical odor from a person who's already scared. That chemical odor might be classified as a type of pheromone. It's not going to cause a reflex, but it can modulate a reflex just a little bit. Okay, cool. Let's go deep into these, because I think these are, things that can help us kind of not only learn about pheromones more, but allow us to organize everything we've talked about in some ways. So let's talk about possible signaler pheromones, all right? And I think you're going to find these really interesting. We already talked about some of these, right? The t-shirt tests that are going to signal whether a person's male or female, or related to us, or all that sort of stuff, or half related to us. But there's other ones we want to talk about too. And here's where we're going to turn back to our friend, the major histocompatibility complex, abbreviated MHC, and the idea that that is telling us something about potentially the offspring health, if in fact people were to have offspring together. Remember, we talked about this idea of complementary immunity, right? That when it comes time to having healthy kids, it makes sense to procreate with somebody whose immune system is not the same as yours, right? You're leaving holes there, but kind of complements, kind of fills in where your immune system isn't great, and you fill in where their immune system isn't great. So the idea of a complementary immune system, it creates stronger offspring. They'll have greater immunity, right? We know this happens with mice and birds and fish and lizards. So two mice will be more likely to have offspring if in fact they have a complementary set of immune systems rather than kind of a redundant set of immune systems. Complementary, redundant has holes there, right? Has gaps in the immune system, right? And in fact, they'll have stronger offspring that have a stronger immunity to mice diseases than animals that weren't. So yeah, you will see they have a preference for having babies with an animal that has a complementary immune system, if in fact their olfactory system is intact. If it's not working right, if they can't detect this sort of chemical messenger in another mouse, they won't necessarily be attracted. So if their smell system is working right, sorry, there's a lot of noise back here. If their smell system is working right, they will in fact more likely mate with a mouse that has a complementary immune system. That's true in birds, that's fish and lizards. Okay, what about humans? Well, it certainly is going to be more complicated than that, right? I told you not to go ahead and take a secret saliva sample of your significant other to see if you're going to have strong offspring. There's so many things that go into mate selection and attractiveness and all that sort of thing. But there is, as we said, some evidence that you will find a t-shirt of somebody who has a complementary immune system to you more attractive than somebody who has a redundant immune system to your own, right? So we did talk about this a little bit, right? Odor attractiveness is when it comes, I think this is mostly, by the way, I should be very honest here. This mostly has to do when women are asked to judge the attractiveness of t-shirts worn by men. Women will choose the man who happens to have the most complementary immune system to their own. Okay, they'll find that one as attractive, right? There's something else though about this. Again, everything's more complicated, but this has been studied in college students. And they had couples come in and they took DNA samples and looked at the MHC composition to see, what that was like. And they found this, that the more redundancy, which is not great, the more redundancy people had in their MHC, the more likely a woman was to have extra relationship affairs and fantasies. Okay, I know this gets a little funky. I'm just distracted by the background noise. Hopefully it's not terrible for you, but this is people usually find this really interesting, so I want to make sure I'm very clear on this. So they had, this kind of is peripherally related to smell, but this is what happened. They had couples come in, usually freshman couples, and they took DNA samples using saliva swab tests, and they looked at the MHC composition, and they found that for couples who had MHC that was very redundant and, had that, therefore would have had gaps in the immune system of their offspring. Women said, they said they were in fine relationships, but when asked about, secret, so without anonymously about their extra relationship affairs or their fantasies about other men, turns out that women who were with men with redundant MHC to their own were more likely to say that they had extra relationship affairs, or more likely to say that they had many fantasies about other men. Okay? And this also, interestingly, increased during ovulation. Okay. Now, again, there's a lot of reasons these things might happen, but the fact that it's related to MHC, which obviously they have no conscious awareness of, right, is an interesting sort of a finding. And the fact that it increases during ovulation might say something about, the genetic influences over these sort of things. But what we can't say is that this is based on the odor of the person, right? That the subliminal odor is affecting somebody to convey the message that there's a lot of overlap, a lot of redundancy in the immune system, and that's causing the woman to have, affairs or fantasies or something like that. We really can't say it's subliminal odor necessarily, right? But it is an interesting set of findings that might suggest that. Okay, let's go on and continue talking about this sort of thing. These are going to include, again, more signaler pheromone demonstrations. Again, signalers are going to be pheromone influences that convey information about kin and gender, and potentially, as we're going to be talking about it again, reproductive potential. How healthy is the offspring going to be? Because we know animals work this way, the people work this way. And I'm going to say this is another bit of evidence that they might. So, the smell of symmetry. What does that mean? It's kind of an odd thing. And what I'm showing, those top two pictures, that I'm showing you pictures of, the hooves of a horse that aren't very symmetric. You can see that there's a very different size in those two hooves. And I'm showing you an image of a man who also doesn't have a very symmetric face. Now, got to be careful here. We're talking about major deviations from symmetry. You can see there's a real deviation across. If you were to draw a line down the middle of his face here, you could see his left side of his face is very different from the right side of his face, right? And by the way, if you're interested in finding faces that are not symmetric, you can look them up and you'll see a lot of faces that are from suspect and prisoner mugshots. That there's a lot of asymmetric faces in those for some reason. It's interesting. Okay. Before we get back to faces, let's talk about animals. And we do know this, that low symmetry in animals that seem to have less symmetric limb sizes, less symmetric limb shapes, will very often, those animals will have slower growth and will not live as long and will not be as fertile as animals that have more symmetric bodies and more symmetric limbs. And this is something that's been known for a long time, right? An animal that's born with less symmetric limbs, especially if it's, seems to be something that's carried from generation to generation, okay, will often be less healthy, will not live as long, and will be less fertile, okay? Which is not advantageous, right? Potentially that would be something that another animal might want to avoid when it comes to procreation, right? What about in humans? Well, it's less dramatic there, of course. We're talking about the complexity of human mating behavior and all that. It's going to be, a lot plays a role in mating behavior and mate selection and all that sort of thing, right? However, when you look at kind of the big patterns of data, and we're talking about real asymmetric faces. So you can look in the mirror and say, oh boy, now that I'm looking very closely, maybe the left side of my face is a little bit more drooped than the right side of my, we're talking about big asymmetries here. What you do see when it comes to body and face symmetry in humans is this, that folks that have less symmetric faces, less symmetric bodies, often have a lower IQ and will show evidence of worse physical health, maybe more susceptible to diseases, and also worse mental health. Okay, we're talking. I mean, again, there's so many things, and we're not talking about. By the way, we're not talking about accidents that might occur in a person that might cause an asymmetry, or if you have an amputation, that doesn't mean that you're asymmetric. We're talking about genetic-based asymmetry here. Genetic-based asymmetry. Okay. On the other hand, people who seem to have a genetically based symmetry tend to have more sexual partners, and this is what the data show. I don't know what this means, but men who have greater body symmetry are able to induce more copulatory orgasms in women than men that don't. Okay, for whatever reason, it seems though to go to some sort of kind of very fundamental biological difference that's going in, right? Finally, we talked about smells, right? In fact, when a woman is in her fertile phase, at least, I'm not sure if this works when she's not in her fertile phase, she will like the smell of a symmetric men's t-shirt better. Okay, so we've already talked about preferences of smell when it came to MHC, complementarity versus redundancy. You want that complementarity, you don't want the redundancy. But beyond that, right? So say, you have 5 men that have very symmetric bodies, and you have 5 men, bodies and faces, and you have 5 men that have very asymmetric bodies and or faces, and you have them wear t-shirts, and then you ask women to choose the 5 most attractive smelling t-shirts and the 5 less attractive smelling t-shirts. They will categorize it based on how that relates to the body symmetry of the man who contributed that t-shirt. Okay, so this is interesting. It could be that the attractiveness of odor is related to the symmetry of a person's body, which really is telling you something about the genetic health. So when I say the smell of symmetry, that's based on data suggesting that at least women can detect a more symmetric man by smelling it and saying that's an attractive t-shirt, right? But really what they are smelling is genetic health. And genetic health can be affecting both the natural scent signature and the genetic-based symmetry of a person. So that's really what they're smelling. So when I say, the smell of symmetry, I'm kind of being sneaky. What you're really smelling is genetic health. Women find a man more attractive, their smell more attractive, if in fact, that has that kind of complementarity versus redundancy when it comes to MHC compatibility. But on top of that, whether they are genetically healthy, which also has a bearing on symmetry, both in body and face. Okay, so that's what I mean. It's kind of a sneaky way of saying you're smelling genetic health. Okay, and that is actually heightened during an ovulation phase of the woman. Okay, the ovulation phase increases a woman's sensitivity to this. Right, so she might be more likely to really correctly divide the 5 t-shirts into saying, yeah, these are the attractive one, these are the unattractive smells, these are attractive smells. She might get that right when it comes to the actual genetic health of the humans, the men that contributed to those t-shirts. Suggesting again that if that's heightened during ovulation, it really might have to do with mate selection and having healthy offspring. Don't forget, there's so much that goes into mate selection. We'll be talking about this again in just a second. Okay, it's going to be more than smell, but we know for animals, smell is really pretty important when it comes to mate selection. For us, it looks like at least it's a piece of things, maybe a small piece of things. So many other things come into play, but it is a piece of things. Okay, a couple of other things now, and having to do with what happens during the fertile phase, ovulation. Not only do they like the smell of a symmetric man or a genetically healthy man, and one that is going to have an MHC that helps complement theirs, right? But they also, during their fertile phase, like the smell of a more dominant man better, right? So, there's ways of establishing dominance when it comes to, alpha males and stuff like that, can be done with questionnaires to some degree. And all this has to be taken with a little grain of salt. It's unclear how much it means. But, like, do you tend to be the boss of things? Do you like to run things? Are you more comfortable being a follower in these situations? When you were playing sports, were you the captain of the team? Or, that's sort of all those sort of questions. And, you can take, again, with a grain of salt, what that means. But it does turn out that women tend to pick out the t-shirts of men that might be rated as more dominant during the fertile phase of her period. Going the other way now, we haven't talked a lot about what men seem to be sensitive to with regard to female odors, but there is evidence, in fact, that men like the smell of a fertile woman better. And so again, these are all t-shirts experiments. They know nothing about, anything about the woman that have been donating the t-shirts, anything about their menstrual cycles. They'll just say, these are the 5 t-shirts that smell good to me. And it's more likely that those will be provided by a woman who is in her fertile phase than in her period or another phase of her cycle, which is really interesting because it's been assumed for a very long time that fertility in humans is not something that's readily advertised. Now, you might know that there are many mammals that do advertise fertility in what happens to their body. And you can see that right here with this little monkey. This monkey's backside and genitals changes color when she is in her fertile phase, or maybe it's a he. I don't know that much about these monkeys. But there's very visible changes in many animals' bodies when they are in their fertile period to advertise it's time to make babies, right? And we always thought that humans don't have much of a way, women don't have much of a way of advertising when they are in their fertile phase. But here we're seeing at least a little evidence that there is something that goes on that can be detected. Now, it's not it's not like you're smelling something and saying, oh boy, this woman's ready for love or anything like that. But men tend to find that smell a little bit more attractive, which is interesting. Kind of does speak to kind of the deep biological basis of our preferences in body odors, natural body scent signatures, right? Again, let's look at the big picture here. What we're talking about is whether we can consider these things pheromones. And a lot of biologists said, no, they're not. These aren't reflexive sort of reactions. Instead, these are, something very, very complicated. We can't classify these as pheromones. And Martha McClintock saying, well, let's just kind of broaden our understanding of pheromones a little bit and think that these are, in fact, chemical messengers that maybe aren't inducing reflexive behavior, but are signaling important things that, kind of have biological relevance, okay? All right, good place to take a little break here. Let's take our 10-minute break and we'll come back and then conclude our discussion of pheromones. Okie dokie, we're back. Hooray. Okay, I think we should do a polling question first, since we're not showing slides. So let's go ahead and do that. This one we'll have to do, with our friend, the major histocompatibility complex. And actually, this information is from when I first introduced the concept. Okay, I think you'll do well on this one. Which is true of the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC? A, it influences one's choice of cologne. B, it influences one's autoimmune system. C, it influences one's scent signature. Or D, all of the above. Go ahead and look back on your notes if you like, but I think you'll do well on this one. Okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. Cool. All right, you guys did well. So the correct answer here is in fact D. Most of you got it right. MHC seems to have a bearing on all of these things. So it was something we talked about at the end when we were discussing MHC on the first day, and that is that it does seem to influence people's choice of cologne, because a cologne will mix with one's own scent signature and will smell differently on different people. Because the scent signature has a chemical reaction to the cologne. So the colognes are, to some degree, chosen based on one's own scent signature, which is related to the major histocompatibility complex. So both A and C are right. And then, of course, as we've been discussing today, as well as last class, it has a strong bearing on the autoimmune system, as well as the immune system. So the correct answer here is all of the above, D. So go ahead and take a picture of that. So you have it in your notes ready to answer for the exam on this weekend. And we'll continue. Any questions on anything right now? Since I just, okay, we're good. All right, let's go ahead and share our screen again then. Oh, actually, you know what I'm gonna do? All right, share sound, yeah, cool. Good. So let's just stop a second and look at the big picture here. We're contemplating whether we can discuss pheromones for humans. And what pheromones are, just to remind you, are kind of chemical messengers that can be detected by an animal's scent system. Typically, well, at least with humans, it would seem to be an unconscious sort of influence. But for animals, it seems to be able to entrain menstrual cycles, and potentially it induces kind of reflexive behavior when it comes to fearful smells, or possibly procreation smells and that sort of thing. And what Martha McClintock thought was that, well, let's not give up on the idea of pheromones for humans, because first of all, there does seem to be some evidence that it does have some bearing on menstrual cycle entrainment, like it does for mice. But also there can be ways in which pheromones might convey information. It might have subtle influences, but maybe not as reflexively determinate as they are for animals. So let's consider the possibility that there are other types of influences of pheromones, but maybe that have more to do with signaling information. And this slide had a lot to do with that. This, the smell of symmetry, right? It seems that pheromones might give some information about genetic health and information about the genetic health of offspring if one were to mate. That also, the genetic health bears on symmetry, visual symmetry. But again, that's, kind of just a way of saying genetic health is what's really being detected here. And some evidence for that with regard to preferences of odor, and potentially even things like one's likelihood of having extra relationship affairs and fantasies and things like that. So that would all count then as potential support for Martha McClintock's idea that, there are chemical messengers that are detected by a human's sense system that can give information, can signal information about the donor of that smell. Okay. But there's another type we wanted to talk about as well, not just the signaler type, but remember we mentioned this other type of modulator pheromones. And what a modulator pheromone would do is not induce a reflexive response in a person, but modulate a response just a little bit, but it would do so through a pheromone sort of influence. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to that now. And basically, we're going to start by talking about the possibility that another person's odors can affect mood a little bit, right? We're always going to, take this with a grain of salt. Again, we're understanding that even though we're seeing some evidence for these things, all of the influences are very subtle, are very, very subtle. So what are possible modulator pheromone effects? Well, this is the one we've been discussing again and again, and that is the possibility that fear is conveyed through a chemical that can be detected by the sense system and can have subtle modulator effects on a person. The classic is the eye blink response, right? So what creates the reflex is something different. It's not the smell. That doesn't create the reflex. The sound creates that. Loud sound creates a reflex, right? But that reflex can be changed just a little bit if one is being subjected to the subliminal odor of a scared person. And that would be a prime example of a modulator pheromone as far as Martha McClintock's concerned, right? There is a, kind of chemical messenger that's being detected by the sense system that has a small but, consistent, reliable effect on one's kind of fear response. Okay. There's other ones as well. And here we're going to talk about examples of how a certain kind of chemical compositions that are thought to be related to pheromones might create different effects in people. Okay, so what I'm calling here is a putative pheromone compound. What that just means is that these are kind of chemicals that are taken from sweat and then kind of distilled. That's just why it says that. Don't worry about that. Let's just, as for all intents and purposes, we can say that the chemical that a man is secreting can have an effect on a woman's kind of metabolism to some degree, or body reactions. Again, these are undetected, right? These are typically done in experiments where, you're either given, a swab that really smells like rubbing alcohol or something like that, or maybe, there's a smell coming through a mask that's just not even detectable, right? But that smell that's derived from a male's kind of natural scent can have subtle effects on a woman as they're smelling it. It can affect their mood a little bit, their self-reported mood, their heart. So, being subjected to a man's smell can elevate mood just a tiny bit. It can increase a woman's heart rate a little bit. It can increase the sweat, skin moisture, just a tiny, tiny bit. And then it can also increase cortisol levels, which are, kind of a secretion that can be tested through secretions. And again, that sounds kind of dramatic, doesn't it? That when you smell a man, when a woman smells a man, all these body things can change. And it is true they can change, but they are tiny, tiny changes. The mood change is, something that you have to kind of observe over many, many subjects, right? You see a tiny bit of an elevation and it disappears once that odor is removed. Heart rate, same thing, maybe a beat or two more per minute or something like that. Skin moisture, you're not going to see sweat. It's just, recorded with, just a very sensitive little, thing that you put on the skin that will tell you there's a tiny bit more moisture on the skin than there was before. And the cortisol levels are very, very, very small. Okay. Again, these are, measurable. They are usually consistent, at least from experiment to experiment, but they are very subtle. They are very temporary. Okay. What else? Well, there is evidence that it can have a very small but measurable effect on sexual arousal in a woman. So what do you do to kind of prime that? Well, you ask a group of women to watch sexually arousing video clips, from romantic movies or something like that. I don't remember the details. Maybe the romantic scenes from The Notebook or something like that. And then have the woman rate her sexual arousal after that romantic scene. And, sexual arousing video clips, will have an effect on people. They'll say, yeah, I'm a little aroused, whatever. But the question is, will that sexual arousal be at all changed if, in fact, they're being presented the odor of a man subliminally? So they're not able to detect that there's an odor there from anybody. Right? But it is being presented, it's being presented at that subliminal level. Will it have an effect? And the answer is, yeah, tiny, but measurable. People who are being presented the odor of women who are being presented the odor of a man subliminally, while they watch these clips, these, romantic clips, will report being a little bit more sexually aroused than women who watch the clips and aren't being presented the odor of a man. Okay. Now, again, let's make sure we're seeing the big picture here, right? What's inducing the real arousal is watching, the romantic clips, the romantic video clips. That is inducing the arousal. But the arousal can be modulated a tiny, tiny bit if one is presented the subliminal odor of a man. If a woman is being presented the subliminal odor of a man. Okay. By the way, I often get questions about how well this works with non-binary or same-sex relationships and that sort of thing. And when I wrote the book, there was very little on that. And I do know there's more research on that, but I haven't kept up with it, I'm sad to say. But if you're interested, you might want to look that up, whether these sort of influences also work in same-sex and non-binary relationships and all that sort of thing. Okay, there's probably some research out there and you might be able to find some nice summaries of it. Anyway, let's go back and get the big picture here. It's important not to lose sight of what's going on here. We are talking about modulation. We're talking about subtle influences over behaviors that are maybe established by some other things, like the fearful eye blink response, the startle response is created by a loud sound, but can be modulated by smell. The sexual arousal response is created by watching arousing film clips, but can be modulated by smell. And here's why I have a picture of, well, two things, Marvin Gaye, right? And a water bed or a circular bed. Okay. What I did is I looked up bachelor pad on the internet, and bachelor pad meant like men who were kind of playing the field back in the 60s and 70s. They'd have water beds, circular beds, bars nearby the bed. I mean, it was kind of like a spoof on single men and their dating life or something back then. But the idea, let's go with Marvin Gaye. Now, I think most of you folks probably know who Marvin Gaye is, and just an amazing singer, musician. And one thing he's known for is romantic music. I mean, very kind of romantic, kind of sensual music. It's got a number of hits like that. And I think, my generation, when we were in, the mood for romance, we'd put Marvin Gaye music on because it really kind of helped add to the setting, as did candlelight and, dimming the lights of the room, all that sort of thing would add to the romance, right? And I think that's the way to think about these pheromone influences. That's the way to think about these influences, right? So just like listening to Marvin Gaye and dimming the lights and lighting candles and maybe, having some, I don't know, what else could you have in the room? Those are the best examples. Oh, having a water bed. And a circular bed or something like that. All those things might add to the romantic environment. That's the way to think about pheromones too. If you don't like somebody, it doesn't matter whether they play Marvin Gaye music on their stereo or not, right? You're not going to want to be romantic with that person, right? Or if you're typically romantic with that person, but you had a terrible day, no matter how loud Marvin Gaye is, you're just probably not going to be in the mood for romance, right? And that's how to think of the smell. It's not going to do any sort of reflexive sort of response in a human or anything like that. It just kind of adds to the decor, right? I imagine that, in that experiment where they were showing sexually arousing clips, if the lights of that laboratory, little laboratory room were on while the sexually arousing clips were being shown, people might not rate their arousal as high as if the lights were dimmed in that laboratory room. It could be that would be the exact same strength of effect, maybe, as being exposed to an odor that you can't detect, right? So again, these are small effects, right? These are not determinate by any means. These are not going to make you run away like you're a cockroach detecting a fearful smell, or strike a mating stance like you're a pig that's exposed to a male pig or something like that. It doesn't work like that with humans. That being said, there is information going through the chemicals being detected by the smell system and measurable when it comes to very subtle things that change in ratings or behaviors or something like that, but it's not determinate. So what do we want to say? Well, there's a pig, and there's that bottle of pheromones that are advertised to make romantic partners absolutely fall for you, or make yourself irresistible by wearing something like that on your skin. No, it doesn't work like that at all. When it comes to human pheromones, right, we're talking about that the best evidence for these chemical signals that can be detected by the smell system that can then be observed in subtle differences in behavior. The best evidence seems for signaler modulator, right? So the signaler, all those T-shirt experiments would qualify. The entire first part of the lecture on smell, everything we've talked about, could be considered signaler pheromones potentially. And then modulator, you can induce a little bit more of a fearful response once you've created a reflex or something like that, and potentially you can induce maybe a tiny bit more arousal, but these are very, very small, and that's why they should be considered signaler and modulator, not releaser or anything. There is, though, evidence, right? So I think the primer would be for both animals and humans, if there is this menstrual entrainment, which there seems to be for both. There is evidence for primer pheromones then. But when it comes time for releasers, right, for reflexive responses to pheromones, it does not seem like there's anything obvious in humans at all. I mean, the only example we discussed was maybe the infants when they're kind of reorienting themselves to their mother's smell. Maybe that's considered a release or a reflexive response, but honestly, You don't know what's going through the little infant's mind, and you're assuming it's a reflex because infant minds aren't considered to be as complex as adults, but who knows? So that's not even really a good example, I don't think, of a reflexive response to smell in that case either. So we might have to just reserve primer and releaser pheromones for animals. But it gets even a tiny bit more complicated than that. And this is something that Martha told me, and I looked up, and she was absolutely right. You know what we've been kind of going for. So the fearful one, you know, with ants and cockroaches seemingly reflexively running, even deer reflexively running when they smell another ant or cockroach or deer that's been scared. Maybe that's a releaser. Maybe that's like a reflexive sort of response to a pheromone. But Martha said, when you look at the data carefully, when you look at the experiments that were done on the pig mating stance and other animals kind of proposed reflexive mating stances, it's more complicated. It's more complicated. So what she's saying is that this idea of a true releaser pheromone that's inducing reflexive responses may not exist. It's hard to disprove it, I think, so far for the ants and the cockroaches. But let's talk about the pig. It turns out, if you look carefully, the pig mating stance isn't induced just by the smell, right? The pig actually has to happen. The female pig has to have other types of information that there's a male pig nearby. Okay, if you just provide a female pig the odor of that's an estrus that's ready for love, if you just provide the female pig with a male pig smell, it does not go into the reflexive mating stance. It needs something else. It needs something else, like the sound of a pig nearby or the sight of a male pig nearby. Okay, suggesting this idea that a smell can induce a reflex for mating in animals, it might not be that right. So she's saying, let's, not only are there pheromone responses for humans going to be complex, but maybe it turns out that the pheromone responses for animals are complex too. And us trying to look for reflexive sort of responses in humans to really show that there are pheromone influences isn't really all that valid, because there really might not be that many reflexive responses in animals too. But certainly we can say that for humans, the influences of subliminal odors are not determinate, right? We're not going to choose our mates just based on the odor. And, we have a sense that maybe it's not even all that important at all, even if there is a little, that's a tiny piece of the equation, right? It's not going to, cause us to make choices about whether to gamble or not, whether to be romantic or not, whether to be scared or not. There are other things that have to come into play, right? It just adds to, kind of a little bit of an influence. I mean, that's why this chapter is called Marvin Gaye for the Nose, because in fact, it's just adding, like Marvin Gaye adds to the romance of a situation. The odor can too, but it's not going to cause us to be romantic with people we don't want to be romantic with, or to have romantic situations with somebody that we typically do if we're not in a good mood, or we've had a tough day of work or something like that. It's not determinate at all. Okay. Any questions on this? Because I think that will end our discussion of smell. Yeah. Cool. So let me stop here. Cool. All right. Then if there are no questions, we will go on to taste. All right. Give me a second to set this up. Yeah. It's great. Taste is one of my favorite topics as well. I keep on saying that this is my favorite topic, this is my favorite topic, but hold on just a second. But this is a nice topic to talk about now because I just spent time with the people that kind of helped motivate the reason I wrote this chapter the way I did. Okay, so let's go ahead and share. Good. So great. When I started writing the taste chapter, I thought I'd try something interesting. I thought I'd try going to what's called a dark restaurant. What's a dark restaurant? Hold on. A dark restaurant is it was a fad about 10 years ago when I was writing the book. There's still restaurants around like this. We looked it up. But these are restaurants that advertise as being a completely silent, well, not silent, a completely darkened environment so you're not distracted and can truly taste your food as it's meant to be tasted. Okay, so these are restaurants that are completely dark in the inside. They really do a good job of keeping out all the light, and all the other patrons and the waiters are all getting around in the dark. They're sitting in the dark. And as the food comes in, the idea is to be able to taste the food as it's meant to be tasted without the distraction of seeing other people in the restaurant, seeing your friends, your significant others, all that sort of thing. This is how it's advertised. So I just actually, on Saturday night, went out with these same friends that I went to this restaurant with 10 years ago. Still very close friends with these folks. And we talked about it. We talked about the dark restaurant and talked about whether the restaurant was still around and everything. And so it was just a nice memory we had of it. But I was really interested to see if food would taste differently in the dark. That's kind of how I started my exploration in taste in order to write the chapter. So I have a little video here that does a nice job portraying this the specific restaurant I went to, and interviews some of the patrons and talks about the idea behind the restaurant that we can watch to get a sense of what it was like for me.
I came here tonight because it sounded different. They said it's dining in the dark. It's probably a little unique and disturbing, but that's why we're here.
All right, welcome to Dining in the Dark. Y'all make this special.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
Dining in the dark, it's a dining experience in a literally like dining room, dark dining room where all the food is served by blind servers, and that just makes you have like a totally deeper, greater understanding of the other senses that we all have but often neglect.
Found my butter knife. Is there any butter?
Yeah, it's in the middle of the table, which is here.
The whole idea of dining in the dark comes from Germany. Ever since that first restaurant got so popular, so trendy, so like the thing to do, they started sprouting all over Europe. I took an American friend and she just said, like, why is the good stuff always happening in Europe? Why do we Americans always have to travel to Europe to actually go do fun stuff? And then we just like started talking about it, and that's how we came up with the idea to just do this in the United States.
OPEC dining, the blind leading the blind. What the awesomeness of it is, although they can't see, I can guide them into a great evening of dining.
Dunkin' in, either way.
All right. Someone is entrusting me, a person who cannot see, to guide them and lead them into a dining experience.
The server takes them to the table. The servers exactly know where they're going, so the diners, as soon as the door shuts, they're lost. The server really acts as a guide for the entire night. The blind server is like the only person that can actually do the job because they have like had that disability, which now becomes their ability.
I can't believe, no, you really can't see anything.
Just like you want your eyes to adjust.
No, I know there's no way. I may as well just close them.
I'm not sure. There's some mill homes in Vermont? Yeah.
Okay. Is that my water?
Yeah.
People really go in there and just have such a blast.
Raise your hand.
They just laugh. They just like, they behave like kids.
Where are you?
Are you trying to feed me?
Yeah.
You're awesome.
Warm, cold.
You look awesome.
I love the way you look right now.
At first, when I was walking in, I'm like, I can't do this. I know I can't do this. But then once I got settled, I don't know, it was just crazy. You just like adapt pretty quickly.
There's a complete suspension of self-consciousness. It just brings everything else into sharper focus.
I'm on your right, Brett.
When you go to a restaurant, what the experience is obviously the ambiance, you know, to be seen in there. You don't experience that here. It's more of really tasting the food and people's conversation.
This is like an experiment at being blind.
It is.
It's genius. It really is.
It's
I
really
like this a
interesting.
lot.
Me too.
You're really tasting things, you're really tactile, you're really feeling things, you're really hearing things a little more acutely than you normally would.
Pretty tasty.
It's good.
It was incredibly hard to cut the steak, and then I noticed after a while, I was like, well, nobody can see me, so I just picked up the hunk of steak and started chewing it like a caveman.
Hey, Michael,
Yes.
would you mind helping us and escorting us out?
Yes, I will.
It's almost indescribable unless you're actually, doing it.
It gives your eyes a definite break and allows you to focus on everything else and play with your food, which is always a good thing.
Right.
Coming out, it was like very humbling for me. Like I feel very humble and kind of just appreciative of how easy life really is in a sense for me.
Hey, I'm glad you guys came. All right, my friend. Well, come back again.
We will.
More than welcome.
Thank you so much. Hey, Paul.
Yeah, Michael's great.
Okay. I should say, it really was fun. We had a really great time. It was very funny. A lot of very funny things happened. Knocked over glasses of water, and I remember, spearing I got a vegetarian meal, and I guess I speared a green bean or something and was trying to bring it to my face, and I stuck myself really hard in the cheek with a green bean. It's like, oh, this is weird and unpleasant, but it was really, really fun. I can tell you a little bit more about it. The description of the book is accurate. When we got there was somebody sitting outside with a glass of wine in the lobby, and she was just like shaking. She was really, really nervous. And I guess, it takes a little while to go into a very, very darkened place and not being able to see anything at all. I mean, you're told to shut off your phones and watches and all that sort of thing, so there's no light in there. And it takes a little while, and sometimes people have to come out and take a break, and sometimes, as they were saying, once a week, somebody would come out and say, I can't go back in, and they'd have to leave the restaurant. The way they set up the menu is you order outside, where you can see, of course, and you're given different options on how to order. You can order like, everything you typically would in a regular restaurant, very specific vegetable and main course and dessert and all that sort of thing. Or you can, all my three friends, my wife and my other friends did that. And there's two other options, both of which involve a surprise. You can go all surprise and let them bring whatever they want to you, or you can kind of choose like kind of a category, and that's what I did. I chose vegetables, Not a vegetarian, but I thought it'd be safer that way. And so I got a vegetable-based dinner and had no idea what it was going to be. And it was kind of fun to try to experience and figure out exactly what it was. It was a little, it was a little odd. Certainly, I remember at one point, I had it. What I ended up getting was what they served me was a kind of a Thai-based dish, Thai spice dish, at least with rice and vegetables. We'll talk about how it tasted in a second, but at one point I speared something not knowing what it was. I speared it with my fork and brought it up to my mouth and put it in my mouth, and I had no idea what it was. I started chewing it and still wasn't sure. I mean, and it was freaking me out because it had kind of the shape of like a pinky finger or something like that. It goes, oh my God, what is this? And I thought, oh, well, maybe it's not just the servers who are blind, but it's also the chef. No, I'm kidding. But it really was a strange thing. And then I chewed on it for a while and I realized it was a carrot that was the shape of a pinky finger. We had, I guess, between us, we probably had something like 12 different dishes or something. The four of us, we each had, some appetizer, main course and dessert. And then we had bread and drinks as well. And we shared things. So I think most of us tasted at least 10 or maybe even 12 different things at least. And I'll tell you what my experience was of the food. Remember, it's being advertised as a way for you to taste food more vividly because you're not being distracted by what you're typically distracted by at a restaurant. You really can't see people around you. You really can't see the activity, from the kitchen, or you can't see the activity of the waiters and waitresses. So yeah, you're concentrating on what's right there in front of you. There's no question. But the question is the food better? Does the food taste better? Does it taste more vivid? Right? So that's what you do. That's how we're going to ask this question. Does food taste better? And I'm going to tell you the answer to my experience in just a bit. But before I do, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research. Let me take a second here. Does anyone have any questions about how these restaurants work? Oh, I should mention this particular restaurant. We looked it up the other day. It's no longer in the space that you saw in the video and that we went to 10 years ago, 12 years ago now. It has now moved to a smaller location in Santa Monica. It's still called Opaque, I believe. That's what my friend said Saturday night. But it is in a smaller space in Santa Monica, and you can see the Yelp reviews about whether people think the food is good or not. Okay, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But I'll tell you my experience in just a second. Before we do, though, let's look at the research about how food should taste and how vision affects how food tastes. There's been research for a long time in the food production field, showing that the color of things will influence how it tastes or what people think it tastes like. So maybe this isn't that surprising to you. When I was a kid, it was all sugar drinks, fruity looking sugar drinks that, there was like a cherry Kool-Aid and high C and things like that. I don't know if you folks have ever been exposed to that, but in your generation, dairy at least, it's a little bit more healthy, right? You've got all these power drinks. My kids used to demand power drinks after a sport at one of their soccer games or something like that. They said it was the only thing they would drink. And you're probably not surprised to know that those drinks are largely artificially colored. Maybe they have a little natural food coloring in them, but mostly artificially colored. And what both the companies that make Kool-Aid and the companies that make Gatorade know is that color influences how things taste and how vivid it tastes, right? So you can actually take a cherry flavored drink, dye it orange, and serve it to people, and they will say it tastes orange. And vice versa, you can do the same thing. You can take an orange flavored drink that has all the components that should make it taste citrusy and orange, but dye it red, put a red food coloring in it and ask people what they taste, and people will say it tastes like cherry. So you can get these kind of dramatic effects, at least with these sorts of drinks, right? You can actually swap what people say they believe they're tasting by the color. But even for drinks certainly like this, but other foods, it's known that the intensity of taste will depend not just on the actual chemistry of the food itself, but on how bright the color is. So if you want to make a dessert, a chocolate dessert, or not, maybe chocolate's not a good example, maybe a custard or some sort of ice cream, taste more vivid or taste more intense, you can change its color, and people will say that. If you want an ice cream, a banana ice cream, to taste more like banana, you can make it more yellow, and it will change the experience of the taster, even though nothing in the actual chemical composition of the food that should affect their sense of taste is changed at all. So yeah, absolutely is true of cookies and custards and cakes, and they do this all the time. They put in different food coloring to induce a different sense of how vivid, how strong, how intense a flavor is. And it's very consistent. I mean, they hire people just to change food appearances so that it can have more or less intensity of different flavors. I mean, you folks know this in some ways. I mean, your generation is so much more sophisticated when it comes to cooking and good restaurants and that sort of thing, because of all these wonderful cooking shows that you folks have. You have cooking channels, multiple cooking channels devoted to these sort of things. These cooking shows where your only real experience in what the food is like is seeing it. Maybe you hear a little bit when people are chewing on it or something, but it's largely from sight and then descriptions. That how a food looks is going to have some influence on how enjoyable it is, and certainly if you've done cooking, that the presentation is very important. And it's something that's been known long before all these cooking shows were on in the food production field, where they would change the appearance to make something taste different. Okay, it's not just how there's a color in it or the brightness of the color or anything like that, but the visible texture can have a very strong influence on taste too. There's different ways of showing this, but if there are two custards that look like they're different textures just by appearance, you're better able to discriminate that they are different custards than the same. Don't worry too much about what this means to facilitating discrimination of custards, but I'll just give you a sense of how these experiments are done. You can present a texture of one custard while somebody's actually eating another custard, so they believe they're eating the custard that has the visible texture. And the way you do that, kind of cool magician's trick, is you have a double chambered bowl. So look at this bowl here and imagine that it's got a chamber below here that you really can't see, and you put a straw in. Typically for custards, when they do custard tasting, they'll have people put straws into the custard and sip the custard through the straw. And you can actually put the straw into the lower chamber, which has the custard that they're actually ingesting, because the straw is going to the lower chamber, but they're seeing the upper chamber, which maybe has a more viscous looking custard, a thicker looking custard than the one they're actually ingesting below. And the thickness of that visible custard will make them feel like they're tasting a different custard just because of what it looks like. Okay, so visible texture and things like custards can make a huge difference in what people will say is tasty or not tasty, that sort of thing. And I should say all these examples are kind of established as true perceptual examples. And let's make sure you understand what I mean by this. So they do a lot of important kind of little control things in the experiments to make sure that the subjects in these experiments aren't just trying to give the experimenters what they think the experimenters are looking for. Do you ever hear about that idea that sometimes subjects will kind of second guess the experiment or try to give the response they think the experimenter is looking for? They do all these like little demonstrations to show that this is really the perceptual experience of the eater, the person who's ingesting these things, not just some sort of like, kind of, intellectual game or something they're playing. They have an experience of this tasting better based on the color. They have an experience of this tasting thicker because of the texture they see in a custard, that sort of thing. It is a very strong influence. And it's not only going to show up in how people respond and judge and that sort of thing, it also shows up in the neurophysiology, in terms of how pleasurable something is. And what you see also in the neurophysiology is this, that there is a close connection between what people see and what they taste. So there's many groups of overlapping cells that seem to respond to the tasting of food and the seeing of food. So there's cell groups that have a strong response to seeing a good food, or maybe if you're closing your eyes, tasting that same food. So it's like a group of cells that does double duty here, which is cool because I mean, I've always wondered, why are these cooking shows so popular if you're, as an audience, never tasting the food? You have to completely rely on the descriptions and the close-ups of the food. But the close-ups of the food, now this makes a little bit more sense to me. The close-ups of the food are actually inducing some of the same cell groups that are induced to activate when we're actually eating. So this idea of eating kind of by proxy, eating remotely, by just watching somebody eat, it maybe makes a little more sense that these are such popular shows, right? That these groups are there. Also, already from your discussion sections last week that smelling is a huge component in what and how things taste, and influences how things taste and what things taste like, right? Smell is sometimes considered to be 80% of flavor. Right, you did the demonstration where you first put something in your mouth with your nose plugged and tasted it, and then unplugged your nose, and you had a rush of flavor. What we typically do, is we do it with jelly beans. When we have it as a live discussion section, we have people close their eyes, we put a jelly bean in their hand, and we then have them put it in their mouth while their eyes are closed and their nose is plugged, and we ask them what they taste, and most people say it just tastes sweet, and then the second they release their nose, the entire flavor of the jelly bean comes in. Whether it's cherry, whether it's banana, whether it's chocolate or whatever, it's very, very identifiable, but not until the nose is unplugged. I just laughed because my son and his girlfriend went to Universal Studios, and they went to the Harry Potter place, and they got some of those beanie, I don't know, Barty's beanies or whatever they are, which are the jelly beans that taste like they have a collection of terrible things in there. And when they came home, they just were so happy to give me like the worst flavors in the world, It's like grass, earwax, right? They just thought it was so funny. The grass tastes like grass, which is interesting. But it wouldn't taste nearly as bad if I had closed my nose, certainly, and that's, the importance of scent to flavor. So it actually is the case. The reason I'm bringing this up is because when it comes to smelling food, just, sniffing it and not putting it in your mouth, like some sort of custard or cake or something, cookie or something like that, you actually induce responses in visual brain areas. And so what this really suggests is that vision plays a huge role in how things taste. And so, does food taste good in a completely dark restaurant? Well, what does a dark restaurant do to food, right? It's going to not provide color information. It's going to not provide any sort of texture information. We get texture other ways, of course, but through the tactile, the kind of feel in the mouth, right? But visible texture plays a very important role. So there's two things missing. And then there's one other thing I want to tell you, another piece of this puzzle. And we're going to talk about some experiments next week after our test, where people are asked to be blindfolded for maybe 5 days So anywhere from 2 to 5 days. So typically these experiments are done either in a hospital room or in a very comfortable laboratory room where people are there for 5 days. And we'll talk about why those experiments are important. It has to do with touch and everything, and it's interesting. But as an anecdote, one of the first things people report when they're blindfolded is when they have their first meal after blindfolding, food has no flavor. Okay. Something else that's also reported by individuals who are in an accident and have lost their vision spontaneously. Food is diluted. It has no flavor. Okay. Fortunately, for those that are, blind, there are other sorts of cues that can be attended to after a long period, and food gains its flavor back. But for people who are blindfolded and eating, food has very little flavor, which is exactly what my experience was in the restaurant. So I know, I'd be very curious to see if the advertisements are the same, where they say food tastes more vivid because you're not being distracted by, visual distractions of seeing other people and everything. Now you can really taste your food, because maybe it did that, but oh my gosh, it removed such an important component of information for flavor, which is seeing. Okay, we're used to seeing our food, and it adds to flavor. And this was the absolute experience, not just of me, but of my wife and our friends. We'd have bread, which was texturally really interesting, the bread, but it didn't seem to have very much flavor. We had our main dishes. The textures are nice, but it doesn't really have that much flavor. Same with the desserts. Same with the beer I had ordered, which I had 50 times before that night. Right? The same beer. This beer doesn't taste as good. I wonder if this was from a bad batch, or maybe it expired. I'm not going to be able to tell because I can't see the label. Right? But nothing tastes like it should. And for every dish to be like that, and we thought, okay, it could be that this is one of these restaurants that's got this gimmick, and for that reason, they kind of skimp on the quality of the food, or they skimp on the chef. Maybe the chef just isn't that great, and it just doesn't flavor things enough. But it seemed weird that even the beer I had tasted diluted. And that was our experience before I came and then did research on vision, research on the visual aspects of food, where anybody who does this research would have said, it's probably kind of a fun, silly thing to go to a dark restaurant and spend 2 hours there. It could be fun, but it ain't good for the food. And that's exactly what a lot of other people see. So I think I know it used to be the case that the reviews on Yelp, back when the restaurant was in its old space, would say, the food's not great, but it's fun. The food's not really flavorful, but it's fun. And I ended up feeling so bad for the chef, who probably does a great job flavoring his food. I mean, I'd love to go back and actually be able to taste the food while I could see it, to see if it really made a difference. But, I decided not to name the restaurant in the book, because I would have ended up giving it a really negative review when it came to the food. You got to see your food, at least, at least if you're used to seeing your food, right? That's why people who are blindfolded they feel like the food doesn't taste good. As I said, if one loses their vision spontaneously at first, food will taste bland, but after a while, and this happens with people born blind too, they learn to use their other senses to kind of compensate for it, and food tastes really nice to them after a while. It's just that, if you lose that really major component of what goes into determining flavor, which is vision, then it's gonna be a problem. Okay. Interesting. All right. That might be a little intuitive to you, especially if you are a fan of those cooking shows. But what might seem a little bit more surprising is this. Not only is it food influenced by what you see, food can be influenced by what you hear. And I'm going to make this intuitive for you at first, but it actually is more far-reaching than this. So if you're listening to somebody chewing on a carrot or a potato chip and are asked, how fresh you think it is, your judgment of that recording of somebody chewing on those things will be the same as if you are chewing on them. Okay, so whether it's you chewing or somebody next to you, if you can hear them well, crispness is judged pretty much the same, and it's based on sound. Okay. Now, crispness will have a very strong influence over some, how enjoyable some foods are, right? So, if you want to be eating fresh vegetables or something like that, you would like it to be crisp. Same with, chips, of all types. You want them to be as crisp as they can be. And so they need to make a certain sound. And certainly in the designing of, kind of junk food, sort of Doritos, all that sort of thing, they want to make them crisp when it comes to, the kind of physical aspects of them, but they also want to make them crisp so they sound crisp, because they know people enjoy things more if they're crisp when they're supposed to be crisp. And sound plays a very large role in it. Well, when we're eating, how does sound get to our ears? And it's interesting. It actually, it comes through two different ways. I have a chip here, okay? And if I'm eating it with the front of my mouth, when I first put it in my mouth, the sound can leave where I'm crunching on the chip and go around to my ears like this, okay? But then I put the chip in my mouth, okay? I put the whole thing in my mouth, and I'm still chewing, but I've been told that it's impolite to keep your mouth open, so I will close my lips and keep chewing, right? That's the polite way, at least in our culture, to eat. And so you can, still enjoy it, but with your mouth closed. Now the sound, very little of the sound is coming from your mouth out to your ears from around your head. What's going on is something else. There's sound being conducted within your head, okay? So at first, when you're chewing, sound can come to around your ears just through the air, like you would be hearing somebody else. But then after a while, the sound, when you close your mouth, will be largely coming through vibrations in your head. And that's an important thing to know if you're designing food sounds, right? If you're designing food to have a crunch that sounds crunchy both when your mouth is opened and your mouth is closed. And this is the difference between what's called air and bone conduction. Okay. So sound, let's see, does this image show this guy? Oh, this shows bone conduction, but sound, as I said, can leave our mouths if our mouths are open and come to our ears through the air. But when our mouths are closed, there are vibrations that go through our skull, okay, from our mouth through our skull into our ears directly without ever hitting the air outside, okay? The vibrations are actually conducted through bones. Now, if you want to get a sense of what bone conduction is like, okay, you can, plug your ears and hear your voice, but you don't even need to do that. Don't know if when you realize this, but when you first heard a recording of your voice, maybe now you hear recordings when you're very little because you can do it on your phone, right? Often when I was a kid, you didn't hear it until you would play with tape recorders and do funny things, but you didn't have easily usable or affordable tape recorders until I was a teenager. So I didn't hear my voice as it sounds to other people until I was probably 13, 14 or something like that. And boy, did I hate it, right? And maybe this is what happens with you too when you first hear your voice in a recording. I'm not even talking about singing. I'm talking about just talking. Your voice sounds so much thinner on a recording than it does to yourself. Why is that? Well, it's because you are hearing your voice, not just through the air when you speak. Yes, it does go around your head and goes into your ears. You're also hearing your own voice through bone conduction. So the vibrations here actually vibrate through the bone and it goes to your ear. Those bone conduction vibrations give your voice a kind of greater resonance, kind of a depth that other people don't hear and can't be captured on recordings. So that little thin voice that you hear on recordings is how your voice sounds to everybody else out in the world. You probably know this, right? You sound better to yourself than you sound to other people. That's the bad news, but that's because of bone conduction. So when you're chewing, what happens is, depending on if your mouth is opened or closed, it's going through bone conduction or air conduction, or it's more often just some ratio of air conduction to bone conduction. But if you're designing chips and you want them to be perceived as crispy, these are things that need to be taken into account. Okay, these are things that need to be taken into account. All right. In fact, an experiment that was published right before I was finishing the book discusses this type of thing. It was done with potato chips. And what they did is they asked people to judge the crispness and freshness of a potato chip as they were eating it. Okay. But they did more than that. They put people in a sound booth. I think I have the sound booth here. Oh, yeah, no, before I say that. Okay, well, there's Pringles. I gave away my Pringles story. What they would do is they would give people like little pieces of chips, and they'd say, okay, these are all different brands of chips. We want you to tell us how crisp or fresh each one is, unbeknownst to the subjects, because they were blindfolded. Okay, and they weren't able to handle the chips. They were given to them in the mouth with rubber gloves and everything. It was safe. They were always Pringles. And I'll tell you, if you want to do an experiment with chips and make sure that they're always the same exact from one chip to the other, Pringles are the way to go, right? I mean, Pringles are like robot chips, right? They're all exactly the same. All right, so they come in and they're told that they're different, but they actually are always the same. What makes the subject experience them as different is what they hear. And what they hear is really interesting. So they're put in a sound booth and they have a blindfold on. This guy doesn't, but they're wearing headphones and they're crunching into a microphone. Okay, so the microphone is right in front of them. That microphone takes the sound of them crunching and runs it to a computer where they can adjust the sound, and then it spontaneously, immediately goes back into the headphones. So what subjects end up hearing mostly is the manipulated sound of their own crunching. Okay, does this make sense? They're also told to crunch with their mouths open. Okay, no one's watching you. Don't worry about it. We feel like the best judgment of crunching is to do it with your mouth opened, right? And so just do it that way, and we'll get your reaction. Okay, so they're crunching with their mouth opened. Most of the sound then is going to come manipulated from the computer to their headphones. And what they find is subjects' judgment of how crunchy and fresh the potato chip seems, okay, or how crispy and fresh the potato chip seems, is dependent on the sound they hear. What the computer is essentially doing is changing how bright the sound is versus how dull the sound is, or how loud the sound is versus how quiet. And these are very small changes, but you can increase it a little bit, increase the sound a little bit, and you're getting more of a crunch. Okay, decrease it, you're getting less of a crunch. You can do more than that, though. You can make it a little bit more trebly. You know what I mean by that? Like if you manipulate your car stereo, you go treble or bass. That's going to make it sound kind of brighter. We talked a little bit about this when we were talking about cues for distance and stuff, right? You make the sound brighter or duller. If in fact it's a sound that you're manipulating in the computer to be louder and brighter, people will say, oh, this is a good one. This is a nice, crispy, fresh potato chip. If on the other hand, you're given the same Pringle, you don't know it's the same Pringle, but you're given the same Pringle, and now the sound is manipulated on the computer to be more dull and quiet, people will say, nah, I don't like these. These aren't very crisp. They don't taste fresh. This is not my type of potato chip. So they're not judging how loud it is. They're not judging how bright it is. They're just judging crispness and freshness. And freshness, I think, was the original thing. It's like, go ahead, just put this in your mouth. And they don't know the sound's being manipulated. They're very subtle manipulations, but they know they're wearing headphones and all that. But still, they're asked just to tell us how fresh this is. And their judgments were very strongly determined by what they were hearing. Okay, so it's not only sight and smell, as you know, that affects flavor and taste. It's also sound. Very cool. Okay, we'll continue talking about this next class, but let's finish up by doing our last polling question. think there's one more left, right? Oops. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this should be easy for you. It's on smell, and it's on subliminal smell, but it's on an experiment that you remember well, because I talked about it both last class and then again briefly starting at today's class. And this is how you get somebody to clean up a few more cookie crumbs in an experiment. Actually, that should sound familiar to you. One way to get someone to clean up a few more cookie crumbs is to present them with a strong, noticeable odor of cookies. B, present them with a weak, undetectable odor of cookies. C, present them with a strong, noticeable smell of a cleaning fluid. Or D, present them with a weak, undetectable odor of a cleaning fluid. Think carefully. I think you're going to get this one. If you understand the concepts of that experiment, you should be able to do this one. All right, I'll give you another 10 seconds and then we'll go over the answer. Okay, terrific. Most of you got this right. The correct answer here is D. Present them with a weak, undetectable odor of a cleaning fluid. So presenting them with a cookie smell is not going to do anything, whether it's a detectable or undetectable odor of a cookie smell. It's the cleaning is going to be induced by a cleaning smell. So it's the cleanup of the cookie, and it does other things too if you look back on the slide. But the cleanup of the cookie crumbs will be induced by an odor of a cleaning fluid such as Pine Sol, and critically, it has to be an unnoticeable, a weak, undetectable odor of a cleaning fluid. If it's a very strong, or if it's a noticed cleaning fluid, it's probably not going to do it at all. It's not going to have any effect at all. It's critical that it be subliminal, so it needs to be undetectable, and it needs to be the cleaning fluid. Okay. You know, if there's any questions on those, take your. Oh, I didn't share results. I apologize. There you go. Go ahead and take a picture of that. So the correct answer is D on this one. Correct answer is D. It is the, oops, yeah. Let's move this over here. Yep. Oh, shoot. Okay. Cool. Uh-oh. Okay, that's it. Am I still on? Yeah, there I am. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why all of a sudden that became so big. All right, that's it. If there's no questions, and I will see you Thursday, and we'll finish up taste, and that will be all the information for the exam. All right, bye-bye.